In the carriage shed of the big station stood old Slow Coach. She was feeling very sad. For years she had been sitting idle in the shed, gathering dust and cobwebs, and occasionally even being left outside for days, having to endure all the elements from the baking heat to soaking storms, since she was only ever seen as taking up good storage space. Every day she would see coaches of all sorts being pulled out of their shed and readied for work, and she could see their very cheerful reactions at getting to go off to many different places all across the island. "We're going away, we're going away," they sang, while old Slow Coach just sighed sadly to herself. One day, Thomas and Percy were called from their branch lines by the Fat Controller. They saw him at the big station. "Dennis is stuck at the harbour, so I need you two to do his work while he's away." "Yes, sir," replied the two tank engines, and they puffed away. Percy puffed into the carriage sidings, and he could hear some sniffling sounds nearby. Then he saw old Slow Coach. Percy could see that she had been crying. "Oh, hello, Percy dear," she sniffed. "What's the matter?" asked Percy. "I've been standing here for years, Percy dear, never going out and just gathering dust. Sometimes they'll pull me out from the shed, but only so I can just make room for other coaches. I feel I have no purpose anymore." "Well, of course you have purpose," Percy protested. "Don't you worry, I'll show you." And he puffed away with some coaches for Henry, leaving behind a very doubting coach. Percy later told Thomas about old Slow Coach. "She's still here?" he gasped. "Yes, but she feels like she has no purpose on this railway after being cooped up in that shed. We must show her that she still does." Thomas agreed, and the two engines were thinking on what to do. At last, Thomas had an idea. "She's an old brake coach. Perhaps you'll put her at the back of Henry's train, eh?" "Good idea," replied Percy happily. "I'll start arranging her now." And the little green engine bubbled happily away. Old Slow Coach was sleeping soundly in her shed as Percy buffered up to her. She was surprised by the jolt. "Oh, I say, what's going on?" "You're going out today, Coach," whistled Percy excitedly. "You're going to be put on Henry's train." Old Slow Coach beamed with happiness for the first time in years. She was excited. "Oh, thank you, Percy. Thank you." Soon Percy shunted Coach onto Henry's train. Just then Henry arrived. He was surprised to see old Slow Coach behind his train. "Good morning, Henry," she said cheerfully. "Lovely to see you again." "What is she doing here?" replied Henry. Then Percy and Thomas explained the situation. Henry was cross. There's a good reason why the Fat Controller kept her in the shed. You see... But before Henry could explain, there was the sound of broken wood, and a shout came from one of the passengers. Then all of a sudden, every last passenger scurried out of Old Slow Coach like mice. "We're not going in that coach," they protested. "I nearly fell through the floor of the restroom because of some rotten wood." "That's why she's in the shed," growled Henry. Thomas and Percy were very upset, and so was Old Slow Coach. Percy shunted Old Slow Coach away. And then put the normal brake coach in place again. Henry puffed crossly away. He was now late. Later that day, the Fat Controller spoke to the two engines crossly. "You two should know better when it comes to coaches as old as Old Slow Coach," he said crossly. "She is worn out and has become too expensive to repair, so she must stay in her shed at all times." "But sir," she told Percy that she feels she has no purpose on this railway anymore. "It's true, sir," replied Percy. "Like I said, she's too expensive. Now back to work, please," he ordered, and so Thomas and Percy puffed away. With the line to the harbour now fixed, the two engines were spending the night at the main sheds before going home the next day. Henry was there too, and he was still cross at being late after the situation with Old Slow Coach. "She's a waste of space, that old coach," he said. "Stuck in that shed all day, every day for years. Why would the Fat Controller keep such a waste?" Thomas and Percy fumed at Henry's bad-mouthing, but before they could say anything else, Henry's driver came to see him. "Go on, Henry. It's time to take the nightly express." Meanwhile, the Fat Controller was in his office, looking over some final paperwork. He saw Henry outside of his office, and then he saw an old picture of him when he first came to the island in his old shape. The Fat Controller pondered for a while, then remembered the story of how his great-grandfather was thinking of replacing Henry because of his faults due to his smaller firebox in his old shape, but instead had given him a fair chance to prove himself after ordering the new expensive Welsh coal. Then he reflected on Old Slow Coach. "Well, perhaps this time I'll give her another fair chance. And maybe one day there will be a purpose for her again," he said, and once he finished his paperwork, he left his office and hopped on board Henry's train, heading on his way back to Wellsworth.